Charles and Betty Bowman seemed like the perfect couple, living a life of wealth, charm, and quiet suburban bliss. But behind closed doors, Betty was plotting a deadly plan that would unfold over 10 chilling days, changing everything forever. Betty Bowman was the kind of woman everyone admired without realizing there was a shadow lurking beneath her perfect exterior. In her early 30s, she had an elegance that turned heads wherever she went. Her house in a quiet suburban neighborhood was pristine, with a garden that seemed to bloom under her careful attention, and every corner reflected a sense of order and refinement. On the surface, Betty lived a life many envied. She had a husband, Charles, whose career brought them wealth and social status, and a circle of friends who praised her charm, wit, and grace. At neighborhood gatherings, she laughed effortlessly, making everyone feel at ease, while her social media posts showed vacations in exotic locations and perfectly styled outfits, painting a picture of a woman who had everything. Yet behind closed doors, the reality was far different. She felt trapped in a life that no longer satisfied her. The dinners with Charles felt like obligations rather than shared moments, and the conversations were often filled with polite smiles hiding unspoken resentments. Betty began to feel invisible, a passenger in a life that belonged to someone else. She spent hours walking through her home, observing its empty corners and imagining a life where she had complete control, where she could finally escape the subtle frustrations that had built up over years of quiet dissatisfaction. Every evening, she would sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker and the world go by, while her thoughts took darker turns. The admiration from others only deepened her sense of irony, fueling a dangerous obsession. She began to imagine scenarios where she could reclaim the power she felt she had lost, and in those fantasies, a plan began to form, one that would change everything in ways no one could foresee. The cracks in Betty's seemingly perfect life started appearing in ways she could no longer ignore. It began with small things. Charles coming home later than usual, his laughter over the phone sounding different, distant, as if he were sharing moments with someone else. Betty initially brushed it off, telling herself it was just the pressures of his job, but the unease in her chest refused to fade. One evening, while Charles was out, she decided to tidy the study, a room he rarely let anyone enter. It was there that she stumbled upon a hidden compartment in his desk, something she had never noticed before. Inside were envelopes stacked neatly, filled with cash, receipts for lavish purchases she had never known about, and, most unsettling of all, letters from another woman. The handwriting was delicate, flowing, intimate, and unmistakably personal. Betty's heart raced as she read them, each word a silent confirmation of betrayal. Instead of feeling hurt in the way most people would, a cold clarity settled over her. She realized that confronting Charles would not give her the satisfaction she craved. She wanted control, not confrontation. That night, she stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, letting her mind twist through the possibilities. Every scenario she imagined involved complete dominance over her life and Charles, removing the threat he now represented. She thought of ways she could gain everything she desired without the interference of anyone else. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about seizing power and reshaping her life on her own terms. By the early hours of morning, Betty had made a decision. What began as quiet observation and resentment had evolved into a dangerous blueprint. The first seeds of her plan were planted, and from that moment, every action she took would be measured, calculated, and aimed toward one chilling goal. From the moment Betty made her decision, she became methodical in a way that surprised even herself. She spent the entire day observing Charles, noting every detail of his routine as if her life depended on it. She watched the times he woke in the morning, how he dressed, the routes he took to work, and the small habits that revealed his predictable patterns. Each movement, each glance, each idle gesture was cataloged in her mind and later written down in a small, hidden notebook she carried with her everywhere. She paid attention to the security cameras around the house, their blind spots, and the times they were offline for maintenance. Betty even took note of the neighborhood patterns, the neighbors who left for work early, the mail carrier's predictable schedule, and the streetlights that flickered at night. It was as if the entire world was a puzzle she had to solve before the final act. The more she studied Charles, the more confident she became in her ability to manipulate events without leaving a trace. She started visualizing scenarios in her mind, imagining how each step could unfold with precision. Each detail was vital. A misplaced object, a time distraction, even the weather outside could play a role in her plan. Her journal became a map, a blueprint, a secret diary of intentions that she guarded with obsessive care. Friends noticed her quiet focus, assuming it was work-related stress or a newfound hobby. No one suspected that behind Betty's calm, attentive demeanor, a dark and carefully structured strategy was taking shape. By the end of the day, she had created a mental timeline, broken into hours and minutes, predicting every move Charles might make and calculating how she could intervene without detection. In that moment, Betty realized that knowledge gave her power, and she intended to wield it with ruthless precision. By the fourth day, Betty had moved beyond observation and planning. She was ready to prepare. She created a list of items she claimed were for routine home maintenance, tools, cleaning supplies, and small household gadgets. Each purchase was carefully thought out, allowing her to conceal the true purpose of what she was acquiring. She visited stores with a calm demeanor, selecting objects that could serve multiple purposes, hiding dangerous intentions behind the guise of mundane chores. A simple wrench could become a tool in her plan. A bottle of cleaning solution could mask evidence. She even researched online, reading forums and articles about home safety and accidents, carefully noting which items could create plausible scenarios. Packages were delivered in plain boxes, and Betty ensured that neighbors, delivery personnel, and even her husband remained unaware of her growing arsenal. She labeled everything meticulously, hiding certain items in cupboards, behind furniture, and beneath floorboards. Each hiding place was chosen for both accessibility and secrecy. As the day passed, she experimented with minor modifications, ensuring that each item functioned exactly as she intended. The precision thrilled her. The ordinary had become extraordinary in her hands. To outsiders, Betty remained the same charming, organized woman she had always been. She chatted with neighbors, sipped coffee with friends, and even volunteered for a community event, maintaining the perfect illusion. But behind closed doors, her home was slowly transforming into a carefully orchestrated environment, each element a small piece of the larger puzzle. By nightfall, she reviewed her journal, checking off items and making notes about where they would be needed in the coming days. Every small preparation brought her closer to executing the plan she had imagined with such chilling clarity. Her confidence grew, and with it, a sense of inevitability settled over her. The plan was no longer just a thug. By the fifth day, Betty was ready to test her carefully laid plans in small, controlled ways. She began creating minor hazards around the house, each designed to seem accidental yet provide her with valuable insight into how Charles might respond. A slightly loose railing on the staircase, a carefully tilted rug, a slippery spot in the kitchen. Each was tested while she observed from a distance. She watched his movements, noting his reactions, the slight hesitation before he stepped carefully, the irritation that flashed briefly across his face. It was not enough to harm him, but it gave her the information she craved: how he moved, how he reacted under stress, and how easy it might be to manipulate circumstances in the future. Betty documented everything meticulously, jotting down even the smallest details in her hidden notebook. She noted which rooms were most prone to accidents, which objects could serve as tools, and how long it took Charles to notice irregularities. Each small incident sharpened her focus and increased her confidence. The more she observed, the more convinced she became that she could control the outcome completely. In her mind, she ran countless scenarios, tweaking them with every observation to make them more precise, more effective. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing her influence take effect without anyone suspecting her intentions. Even as she maintained her cheerful demeanor with neighbors and friends, a darker sense of excitement began to grow within her. These minor tests were more than preparation. They were practice, rehearsals for the final act she was imagining with chilling clarity. By the end of the day, she had mapped out a detailed sequence of potential events, predicting exactly how Charles would move, react, and respond. Each observation reinforced her belief that she was fully in control, and that nothing could stop her from completing her plan. On the sixth day, Betty's plan, which had until now progressed with careful precision, suddenly faced an unexpected complication. She discovered that Charles had been quietly arranging a surprise, a weekend getaway meant to rekindle their marriage and ease the growing tension she had so carefully observed. The realization hit her like a cold wave. All her calculations, her timed sequences, and her staged hazards now risked being disrupted. The thought of losing control filled her with panic. She had spent days building a blueprint in her mind, orchestrating every movement down to the smallest detail, and now the timeline was threatened by a twist she had not anticipated. Betty spent hours pacing through the house, considering her options. Every possible adjustment had to be weighed against the risk of exposure. She could not simply postpone her plan. It had to move forward, faster and more precisely. She began analyzing the details of the getaway, noting departure times, luggage packing habits, and the way Charles would leave the house for the trip. Even the hotel location and itinerary were considered, as she realized that any misstep could allow him to escape the consequences she had envisioned. The urgency transformed her meticulous calm into a tense, calculated frenzy. She started reordering her preparations, moving certain items closer at hand and adjusting hazards to account for a quicker execution. Every thought, every movement was governed by the looming deadline. The stakes had never felt higher. What had begun as careful observation and minor experiments had now escalated into a race against time, and Betty's mind sharpened with ruthless determination. By nightfall, the plan had been rewritten in her head, accelerated and refined, with one unshakable certainty. Nothing, not even her husband's secret surprise, would derail her ultimate goal. By the seventh day, Betty's home had transformed into a carefully constructed maze designed to manipulate and control every movement her husband made. She spent the entire day rearranging furniture, moving objects, and creating subtle obstacles, each intended to guide Charles into situations that would serve her plan. Every placement was deliberate. A chair shifted slightly could force him to step a certain way. A door left unlocked at a precise angle could create the perfect distraction. Betty also studied the house from multiple perspectives, imagining how someone entering each room would react, and she adjusted her setup accordingly. Her journal, now thick with notes and sketches, served as both blueprint and record, detailing the exact timing, positioning, and sequence of events she envisioned. She even calculated how environmental factors, light, sound, and temperature, might influence his movements and reactions. Research had taught her how minor accidents could appear completely natural, and she applied that knowledge meticulously, testing small scenarios without drawing attention. Outside, she maintained her usual persona, a friendly, composed neighbor who laughed at casual jokes and shared tea with visitors, masking the tense precision happening behind closed doors. As night approached, she revisited each room, imagining the steps Charles would take and visualizing how she would orchestrate the final act. The more she simulated, the more flawless the plan appeared in her mind, and the closer she felt to absolute control. Her confidence had reached a dangerous peak, bordering on obsession. Every corner of the house now reflected her intentions, a silent testament to her determination and cunning. By the end of the day, Betty was ready. The setup was complete, the stage prepared, and all that remained was to wait for the perfect moment to turn her calculated design into reality, a moment she knew could not be delayed. On the eighth day, everything Betty had meticulously planned came together, and the tension that had been building for over a week reached a fever pitch. She waited until Charles returned home late from work, his routine carefully predicted down to the minute. The house was silent, every trap in place, every obstacle positioned exactly as she had rehearsed in her mind. For hours, she monitored his movements, heart pounding, knowing that one misstep could unravel everything. As he walked through the front door, she observed his posture, the way he set down his briefcase, and the rhythm of his steps as he moved through the rooms. Everything seemed to follow her expectations, until an unplanned delivery arrived at the door. A courier carrying a package disrupted the carefully timed sequence, forcing her to improvise. For a tense moment, panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm, recalculating her moves in real time. She adjusted the placement of objects and guided Charles subtly, all while maintaining her composed exterior. Every action was measured, precise, and deliberate. By late evening, She enacted the final part of her plan, manipulating circumstances so that what occurred could appear accidental. She watched intently as each element unfolded, her heart a mix of fear and exhilaration. Despite the unexpected interruption, the plan succeeded in its immediate goal. Yet even as relief washed over her, a small voice of doubt lingered at the edge of her mind, reminding her that perfection could be fleeting. The events of that day marked a turning point. What had begun as observation and minor experiments had escalated into execution, and Betty now understood the full weight of what she had done. The calm exterior she would maintain over the next days would hide the storm she had unleashed. ChatGPT said, by the 9th day, the immediate danger had passed, but Betty knew the most delicate part of her plan was just beginning, the cover-up. She moved through the house with meticulous care, cleaning up any traces of what had occurred. Each item, each misplaced object, each potential clue was scrutinized, adjusted, or removed entirely. The areas that had been manipulated to execute her plan were returned to their ordinary appearance, leaving nothing that could betray her actions to casual observers. She scrubbed surfaces, wiped fingerprints from unlikely places, and ensured that every detail would appear consistent with a normal household. Even small imperfections were corrected. A slightly scuffed floor, a displaced rug, or an out-of-place chair could raise questions, so everything had to be perfect. Betty also monitored her surroundings, noting which neighbors were active, which mail had been delivered, and any unusual activity nearby. Every movement outside the house was accounted for in her mind, ensuring that no witness could inadvertently expose her. Despite her outward composure, a sense of unease settled in. She understood that while she had successfully executed her plan, it was the aftermath that would truly test her. Maintaining the illusion of normalcy required constant vigilance. Friends and neighbors still saw the same cheerful, attentive Betty they had always known. She chatted over tea, attended local events, and maintained her social media presence, projecting an image of normal life while secretly guarding her secrets. By nightfall, she reviewed her journal once more, checking off every detail she had accounted for and noting minor adjustments that might be needed in the coming days. The tension was palpable. Each step of the cover-up was a delicate balancing act, and Betty knew that one misstep could unravel everything she had worked so carefully to create. On the 10th day, the fragile illusion Betty had worked so hard to maintain began to unravel. It started with subtle observations from a neighbor who noticed something unusual. A security camera outside the house had been moved, and the footage for the previous day was missing. At first, it seemed like an insignificant detail, but it sparked curiosity and unease. The neighbor quietly mentioned it to authorities, prompting a preliminary investigation. Betty, confident in her meticulous planning, initially dismissed the concern, believing she had covered every possible trail. Yet the tension in the house was palpable. She could sense that the smallest slip might expose everything. As investigators examined the scene, they found inconsistencies that seemed minor on their own. A chair slightly misaligned, a cupboard door left ajar, traces of cleaning in unusual places. Individually, these signs could be written off as coincidence, but together they painted a troubling picture. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when the hidden journal, filled with her detailed observations, plans, and notes, was discovered. It was hidden in what she had thought was a completely secure location, but a small, overlooked detail led investigators to it. The pages revealed a chilling, step-by-step account of the 10-day plan, leaving no doubt about her intentions. What had seemed like a perfect execution now became her undoing. Neighbors and friends were shocked to learn the truth behind the woman they had admired and trusted. Betty Bowman, once seen as charming and composed, faced the weight of her own meticulous design. The life she had so carefully constructed was gone, replaced by the reality of exposure, arrest, and the consequences of a plan that had seemed flawless but ultimately collapsed under its own dark precision. Her story ended not in triumph, but in the devastating revelation of her own making.